We have, in one way or another, landed on a bit of a national conversation about police practices. And that's a good conversation. I think we should have that. I, for instance, think we should seriously consider body cameras for use by police officers. My concern specifically is over the growing scapegoating of police officers in America today. Now, before I go any further, let me be perfectly clear about one central point. If a police officer acts unprofessionally, acts outside the bounds of ethical standards, or breaks the law, then by all means that police officer has to be held accountable and punished for his or her transgression. There's no excuse whatsoever for unlawful police conduct. And I'll be clear about another point. It's true that there are real and horrible cases of police misconduct. No one's that I know is trying to deny that or sweep it under the rug or pretend that it doesn't happen. But let's also keep this in perspective. There are doctors who break the law. There are accountants who break the law. There are lawyers who break the law. There are elected public officials who break the law. The fact is, there are bad actors in every profession, in every line of work, in every walk of life, and that's true of police as well. But if you listen to many of the police critics that we hear from today, you'd think that there's some sort of epidemic of crimes perpetrated by the police. And that, Mr. President, I assure you is not true. Far from the epidemic of police misdeeds that some claim to be happening out there, I think just the opposite is true. The overwhelming majority of police are honest men and women. They have very high ethical standards. They don't have a racist bone in their body. If the police in the Gray case committed crimes, then they must be punished. I don't question that in the least. But what happened last week in Baltimore was not only about Freddie Gray. In scenes reminiscent of last year in Ferguson, last week in Baltimore, we saw a great American city dissolve into utter lawlessness. Well, some people excuse this lawlessness and point to the difficult underlying conditions in the local community. But let's ask ourselves, who gets hurt the most by these riots? Well, we know. It's the very poor people from these communities. Now, when 6 police officers were charged on Friday in the death of Freddie Gray, there were celebrations on the streets in Baltimore. And, Madam President, I'll say, at a certain level, that's completely understandable. Whatever Mr. Gray did on that day, the day that he was arrested, he certainly didn't deserve to die. And his death cries out for answers. We need to have answers to these questions. And in the passions of last week's, I understand why people cheered the appearance that the criminal justice system was standing up for Mr. Gray. I totally understand that. But let me ask a question. What happens if these accused police officers are found not to have broken the law? These officers are going to go through hell whether they deserve to or not. Their lives will never be the same whether they are guilty or innocent. And what message does that send to all the tens of thousands of police officers all across America who risk their lives every day to protect their communities from criminals? Unfortunately, it says there are a lot of people out there who are looking to misplace a lot of social problems we face in our country on the backs of the police. It says they might not be allowed to do their jobs when their communities most need them to do their jobs. It says that one day, should they find themselves accused of wrongdoing, there might be a public mob that clamors for their conviction and threatens to burn down the city if the legal system finds them innocent. Madam President, that is a sad state of affairs. Now, I'm not defending the officers in the Gray case. I don't know whether they are guilty or innocent. I expect the legal system to determine that. But that's not really my point. My point is that while there are some police officers who act terribly, and that must be stopped, there's no epidemic of police criminality in this country.